I think it was November 2010. I was on a funny little van or a bus trundling from Oxford to Cambridge between conferences there, and I was sitting right behind Megan Smith, who was on her phone, and she turned around and said, "Joey, would you want to be director of the Media Lab?" in that, thing that you will hear later, which is that Megan excited voice. She says, "I'm talking to Nicholas." And I said, well, yeah, of course I'd be interested, because that's what I say to just about anything. And so then I got on the phone with Nicholas. The call kept failing, and Nicholas talked about how we can't even get phones to work right after all these years. But then later in December, Nicholas sent me an email saying, we kind of had a conversation, and we don't think it's worth you coming in because your lack of degree and a variety of other things, it's probably not going to work out. So I said, okay, fine. That was interesting having a conversation with Nicholas. And then in March, at the beginning of March, Nicholas said, "So when can you be here? Can you be here within the next 14 days? And I said, well, I guess I could. And I remember showing up, and so my brother-in-law, Scott, who's here, was a Media Lab or Architectural Machine Group grad. And so I knew about the lab, but I'd never been to MIT or the Media Lab. And I remember showing up at the new E14 shiny new building, feeling completely out of place. Like, how could I ever even be associated with something that feels so impressive? And I actually almost felt like I shouldn't, but I'm here anyway. We've got all the meetings set up. I might as well go through. And then for the next 2 days, I just started talking to and meeting with all the students and the faculty. And it was probably the most interesting 2 days in my life, where and just for those of you who don't know me, I'm a 3-time college dropout, kicked out of kindergarten, and my sister, who studies people like me, calls me an interest-driven learner. So I was able to somehow kludge together an education, but I've never been associated with anything so formal as MIT. But anyway, so I got in and I met all of these people who were almost just like me. It felt like I had sort of discovered my long-lost tribe of interest-driven learners. These are people who were passionate, who were focused, who didn't care about permission, and it was very weird because I had sort of thought I was the only one that had this really funky DNA. But I found a whole building full of these people. And so I said, oh, well, this is where I belong. And so I knew immediately that I belonged here, and it seems like the people that I met felt the same way. But then they said, okay, well, we like you, but we'll get back to you. And so then, I'm sure there was some other process. And then they said, okay, well, it's definitely going to be slightly complicated because it's unusual that you have no degree. And so I came back and we did more meetings, and then I think it started getting into, now that I'm part of the process, I could imagine what the process was like, but it got to the point where they said, okay, well, we don't really know exactly how to appoint you because you're not really a thing. And so towards the end, I ended up in a meeting with Adele. I saw Adele here earlier, and she had just come back from a meeting, so she was kind of flustered. She was flipping through my CV. And I said, I don't have a degree. And she goes, no, I've heard. And then I remember her saying, okay, well, I think the committee said okay, and are you okay? And she says, yeah, I think this should be fine. I said, okay, then what's the process? She goes, I'm not really sure, but I think the provost has to decide. And luckily, your next meeting is with the provost. So I ended up in a meeting with Raphael, who was provost at the time. He's now president, in the cushiest chair I've ever sat in my life. And he said, why are you here? And I said, well, you're part of this process that seems very confusing to me because I don't really know, but apparently you're supposed to decide. And he said, oh, well, if it's just me to decide, welcome to MIT. So that was a process. And that was kind of a symbolic moment for me because I realized that not only was I joining the Media Lab, I was joining MIT, and ever since then, so Raphael's now become president, and Bob has become chairman. And the relationship with MIT also has been surprising. First, that they were sort of bold enough to hire somebody that doesn't have a college degree, but I kind of expected that of Nicholas. But that MIT was okay with that. And then since then, it's now been almost 5 years. What was really fascinating for me, first of all, Nicholas has been amazing, and we'll talk a lot about Nicholas. Everybody will talk a lot about Nicholas, but it's funny because the DNA of the lab that was created by Nicholas and Jerry Wiesner and the students and the faculty at the time was the same DNA that I had somehow kind of developed as, I guess the DNA doesn't develop, but the values that I had developed coming from the internet. But the Media Lab sort of predates the internet. So you see the Media Lab going from sort of displays, empowering the individual, then being part of making computers social, and then the network, and then data, and now the sciences. But the core DNA of the lab, the sort of permissionless innovation that has, and the first faculty meeting, we actually had a consensus. I don't know if we've ever had a consensus since then, but the consensus was that we were about uniqueness, impact, and magic. And it seemed like those things were there from the beginning and are still now. And so there's something timeless about the way that the Media Lab was created that's still relevant and maybe even more relevant now. And so when I started working with Nicholas, who's been an amazing coach and an amazing supporter, we agree on like half the things, a lot. And then the other half of the things were kind of the opposite. But Nicholas has been great in helping me think through everything, but also not undermining the process and sort of kind of celebrating that difference, which is, I think, another part of the Media Lab. And so we'll talk a lot today about the 30 years leading up to the Media Lab, but I wanted to share a product of a recent faculty. By the faculty meetings, are some of the most interesting meetings we have. I mean, sometimes they aren't fun, but they're always interesting. And but one of the things that's the best thing to do at the faculty meetings is to try to figure out where are we going. And at the last one, we were kind of starting to try to think about how do we think about design, how do we think about science. And if I can get a slide. So this is a famous picture from Rich Gold that many of you might know. And he was at Xerox PARC, but he had this notion that he had 4 hats that he wore. And somehow he needed to be, have all 4 of these hats. And I always used to think about the Media Lab in these terms, that we have, we use the word anti-disciplinary rather than interdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary would be these 4 people talking to each other. Anti-disciplinary is you're either all of them or none of them, but we were sort of that. So I was kind of using this as a base, and then Neri, on the second day, I think, of the faculty retreat, came back with a much more sketched version of this. This is very classic Neri. But so this is, and I want to just propose this because this is a work in progress. I want to invite you in to start thinking about this. But on this graph, if you look, okay, so you have the art, science, design, and engineering. But this is inspired by the Krebs cycle, which is, as you would know, the basic metabolism. And if you think about the upper half is perception and the bottom half is production, and so the left half is culture and the right half is nature, and you say, okay, well, if you take data and information from nature, science will convert it into knowledge and theories. So these are the currencies between these disciplines. And then engineering takes knowledge and theories and converts it into function and utility. And design takes function and utility and converts it into uses and behaviors in society. And then art will take those and convert that back into perception. And it's this beautiful cycle, except that yesterday, or the weekend, we were with, Neri and I were with Danny Hillis explaining this, and Danny goes, but I don't know that the output of art is the input of science, And I thought, yeah, well. And Neri was like, well, but what about Picasso knew Einstein? And he goes, no, that was after they were famous. I'm like, okay. And then you start to think, okay, the output of art is like billionaires' living rooms, and the input of science is something that happens at MIT, and people get inspired. But so it's not this pretty, right? But then we thought, but shouldn't the output of art be the input of science? Right? Why can't that be? And maybe that's, we are, the program of the Media Lab is media, arts, and sciences. And so we are tasked with the role of somehow making those two things relevant. And if the fact is that they're separated, maybe that's what we should be doing. So that's one of the thoughts that came out of this. I'm not going to go into detail about these other things, but you can see, most of the world business lives in this sort of functional space between design and engineering. Most of academia lives in this sort of space between science and engineering, and philosophy is sort of up there. But it's kind of a beautiful attempt at unifying some of the theories of the world, although this is kind of where we are right now. So we're saying, but, Media Lab used to be art and engineering, and we're doing a lot of new design and science, and those lenses are important. Maybe it's three-dimensional, maybe it's a helix, maybe it's a spiral. So we're still trying to figure this out. But I wanted to share this with you because I do think that the interesting shift. Nicholas the other day, as Nicholas does, said this wonderful thing when we were in a meeting, said, well, bio is the new digital. And that has a very magical Nicholas quality. And again, a lot of our faculty says, wow, yeah, they argue about the details. But I think what's interesting is that science is currently broken in a peculiar way that is so Media Lab in what the solution is. Because I think Bob Langer and others at MIT have connected biology and engineering to create bioengineering, which has spawned a tremendous amount of innovation. But we actually need everything else bearing down on science, because science is important, science is complicated. And I do think that connecting science and art and then bringing in these other things is the role of the Media Lab moving forward. And so in that sense, I think we become even more integral to the future of MIT. Thank you very much.